theme, but more looking at how we do, what sort of mechanisms or approach should we be taking to get carbon out of our electricity system. It seems to me and others that if we are to decarbonise the NEM, it's simply a matter of displacing coal. And as you say, there's no formal trigger to be able to do that. It will depend on economics. So therefore, an economics approach to this problem is going to be the solution. Currently, most days, wholesale energy prices are zero or negative during the middle of the day. Is that correct?
For the last quarter, around 20% of dispatch intervals have been negative, and that is broadly during the middle of the day, yes.
And this is an incredibly powerful force in the NEM, in that it's doing a number of things. One, it's putting downward pressure on coal-fired stations to be able to how much they can operate, and therefore their economics is pushing down. The glut is largely driven by rooftop solar, which can't be curtailed unless you go through the process of what you were talking about earlier. Utility scale solar and wind out in the regions can be curtailed, so they're protecting themselves from those low prices, which has two effects. One, it's that VRE is not putting the downward pressure on energy prices that they've long promised. Would you agree with that?
There's many aspects to that question. I certainly agree that during the middle of the day, an abundance of renewable energy is lowering output from coal. It is seeing lower prices during the day, and yes, that we are seeing large-scale renewable generators, both wind and solar, responding to those negative prices in the middle of the day by curtailing their output. Whether or not that has an impact on the average wholesale market price or forward prices, I can't comment on.
Okay. Given that that economic problem plus the supply problem, that coal mainly stays in the market because being baseload or dispatchable, it has the ability to be able to serve energy into the market when it's higher prices. So that offsets its the economic negatives during the middle of the day. In order to get rid of coal, surely the solutions aren't just more renewables, but it's more storage that can take the place of coal later in the day. So when solar and wind aren't contributing as much as they need to, storage can contribute. Yet I note in the ISP, all actionable projects are all transmission. You don't make actionable projects such as storage, such as more renewables. It seems to me that is there either a bias towards transmission, or is the reason why you can't make actionable storage projects, whether batteries or FAIRs or whatever it happens to be, such that you're starting to solve for the things that are going to displace coal out of the market sooner rather than later?
I'll just say one thing and then I'll ask Merrin to comment on the ISP. The aim of the ISP and the aim of AEMO is not to displace coal. The aim of AEMO is to make sure that Australians continue to have access to secure, reliable electricity at the lowest price they can. And that's our operational role. It's also our planning role. Through the constraints that are in the integrated system plan, as we've spoken about at length this morning, that necessarily sees a decline in coal, and that is consistent with asset owners telling us that these plants are old and retiring. Now, to the point about a large amount of storage, that's absolutely right. A large amount of storage is absolutely required for that firming role, and perhaps I'll just get Marion to unpack that a bit.
Sorry, before you go on, just pick you up on one bit. You say emissions reduction isn't part of your remit. The national energy rules that include the national energy objectives say that emissions targets are are one of the drivers of what you need to do and should be doing. This might be for Ms York as well, because it's ISP. I'm intrigued as to why the ISP uses in all its scenarios an 82% renewable target instead of an emissions reduction target. That seems to skew the outcomes to me.
And if I can just clarify one thing before I ask Marion to clarify that. My words were that it is not AEMO's objective to exit coal. Yes, the National Energy Objective requires AEMO to consider the emissions targets of all jurisdictions, and of course we do that. It plays a much larger role in the planning function.
Sorry, to again pick you up on that. How does AEMO and the NEM meet an emissions reduction target without displacing coal?
I'm not sure I understand the questions.
Well, you can. The majority of the carbon that's in the NEM is coal-fired generation, correct?
Oh, right. Okay. So, if I can clarify, the objective of the integrated system plan is to meet all government targets while reliably and securely supplying electricity to consumers on the way to net zero by 2050. What happens as a result of that? We are technology agnostic. But yes, it needs to meet emissions targets on the way through. It happens that coal-fired generation is one of the highest forms of emissions intensity in the grid, and that is what falls out through the modelling. But it's not through a predisposition against coal-fired generators.
But I'm not saying you're negatively disposed, but you do have an obligation to reduce emissions. And the only way to do that in the NEM is for coal to be either ordered out, incentivised to leave, or the economics of it don't stack up for the plant owners and they choose to exit.
Our obligation is to consider the objectives, the emissions objectives of each of the jurisdictions in the national electricity market in our planning function, and that's the way the integrated system plan comes together.
Again, I go back to why then in the ISP do you use as the baseline for all the three scenarios as an 82% renewables target versus an emissions reduction target?
So the truth is we do both. And do you want to just unpack that?
Yeah, you've asked a number of questions about actionability, about emissions targets, and about how we work through that, I think, in the planning function specifically, as opposed to the dispatch function, which is kind of real-time dispatch at the time. So I'll just stick to the planning function, maybe going to actionability first, and why actionable projects are transmission projects. So the framework that's set out in the National Electricity Rules really applies to an actionable project is something that has a proponent that can do a project assessment draft report. So the way the rules are actually written is that from the time we make it actionable in the ISP, there's an obligation to prepare a PADA within 12 months. And so the obvious implication of that is that the need has to be addressed either by a network or non-network solution. So as part of that RET-T process that we were discussing before, the TNSP may find that batteries or some other form of non-network solution could be the actual solution to that identified need. So that could come out of that process, but it is not something that we could make generation actionable, for example. That's not part of the framework that's set out in the rules, that we could say, well, a generator needs to go here to be an actionable project, because there's no one to produce a padder for a generator. That would only come out of the RIT-T process as a non-network solution to that identified need.
I'll come back to that if I can. It just seems there's a skew in the ISP, not only towards transmission. Now, and I'll separate that out into two sorts of transmission. Transmission in the actual projects that, for example, build infrastructure to connect up the various reses that have been designated around the country. That seems to make economic sense to me. However, the large-scale interconnectors, VNI West, HumeLink, Marinus, etc., I don't understand the economics behind them. Connecting various regions across the country is their intent. Yet there is no generation price differential in those regions. It costs just as much to build or fuel a wind farm or a solar farm in most countries. Yes, there are some capacity factor differences, but certainly not enough to justify the high cost of interconnection. There's no temporal spread in terms of the NEM effectively runs north-south, so there's no time difference, as in a more western district could be supplying the east coast as it goes into dark. There just doesn't seem to be any economic justification for these projects when they come at an opportunity cost to be able to fund other things such as connect out more reses, more battery storage or pumped hydro storage. There seems to be a real loss of opportunity cost there.
So the way in which the Integrated System Plan evaluates transmission, and before I talk about that, the way in which the ISP is developed in the actionability framework is specifically about what is the solution to identified needs going through the next stage, which is really regulated transmission. And that is a difference between generation development, which is investor-led and market-based, and transmission, which is that monopoly service which is regulated under the economic regulatory framework administered by the AER. So that is a difference, and that flows through to the way in which the rules are written. So when we evaluate that in the ISP, what we do is using the cost-benefit assessment analysis guideline that's set out for the things that are within the national electricity rules, there's criteria and arrangements that can be considered in that. We actually compare the integrated system plan development path, the various ones of them initially, and then obviously the one we publish is the optimal development path, with and without the proposed transmission. So all of the existing and committed and anticipated transmission is included. We remove all actionable and future transmission projects and work out how we would meet the objectives. So the emissions reduction objectives, the 82% renewable, all the other things that are in the target statement and the policies that are included, how would we meet that in the absence of that future transmission, both actionable and future projects? Take those out. And what we find is that there would be a lot more generation, storage, other types of infrastructure required. And then we're really looking at the difference between those capital costs, operating costs, etc. So what we find is that the transmission annualised cost from now till 2050 is $16 billion. If we go to the counterfactual and look at what are the other costs that would be incurred, we find that that counterfactual would have higher costs of the $16 billion plus another $18.5 billion of additional costs that would otherwise be incurred to reach those targets. So it's really a cost-benefit analysis that it's net beneficial overall to share that resource and avoid the additional capital cost, operating costs and other costs associated with that counterfactual where you don't have any of that transmission.
I wish I had some more time to debate you on that, because I've got a lot of questions about your approach to cost-benefit analysis. But suffice to say that it would seem to most people that there is a lot more benefit out of, and you'll drive more renewables and more storage by facilitating connection to reses and supporting their infrastructure than interstate connection, which delivers no economic benefit because there's no differences in time, geography or cost.
I think both are required. It's not a one or the other. Connections to renewable energy zones are required. Generators need to be able to connect, but there are definitively benefits that are associated with each of the large-scale transmission or interconnected projects that are shown in the Integrated System Plan, and each one is shown in the ISP.
You might want to put that on notice to me, and I'll put some questions to you on notice to come back to me on that, because I can't see those arguments that can't be met in better ways, particularly at the absolute enormous cost of those, plus all the question marks that exist over how those projects have come to be developed and the cost blowouts that have happened right through that process. But I'll leave it there.
Would you like to go back to the emissions in 82% renewable? Do you have time for that?
I think I need to share the call, to be fair.
Perhaps the short answer is that it is both, as Daniel said. So all of the targets that are set out in the AEMC's target statement, which includes emissions reductions, for example, on the Commonwealth, 43% below 2005 levels by 2030. That's included renewable energy target of 33,000 gigawatt hours, which has already been achieved. Commitment to 82% renewables.
Was that the ISP only models across all three scenarios 82%.
It actually meets all of these, and the modelling includes those as an input, and so the modelling will deliver all of those targets.
But 82% renewables doesn't necessarily equal 43% emissions reduction.
No, but it's a government policy that's in the target statement as released by the AEMC, the Commission. So that's why it's in all of the different scenarios.
But the rules say that the objective itself, number 3, says emissions reductions.
Well, that might be a question for the Commission, but in the target statement that we need to take.
I know it's in the target statement, but I'm referring to what's in the NEOs. Anyway, I'll pass the call to Senator Pocock.